Good evening, everyone. We're going to wait till we have more participants to join in on the Zoom meeting. Looks like we're getting a good group tonight, which is fantastic to see. Just going to wait a couple more seconds before we hop on in. All righty, let's get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Christina Grev, and I am the Collections and Education Specialist at the Mining and Rollo Jameson Museums. Today is Sunday, March 24th, and welcome to our 5th Winter Lyceum presentation of 2024. Tonight is our final presentation over Zoom, so skipping over Easter Sunday on April 7th and in person at the museum, I will be giving a presentation on how our collections team helped to preserve our taxidermy collection and our famous boxing squirrels. We've had a fantastic array of presentations this year covering a variety of different topics, and we appreciate all the presenters who have taken the time to share their expertise. We invite you to stay up to date on all of our upcoming events and museum programs by checking us out online at our website and by following all of our social media accounts. We welcome current friends, members, and donors of the Mining and Rollo Jameson Museums tonight. And additionally, we would like to thank our sponsors whose financial support has made this program possible. Platteville A&W, Inspiring Community, Park Place Living, Senior Living. After the presentation, we will have a Q&A section. So at the bottom of your screens, there will be a button for you to submit your questions. Feel free to submit them at any point during the presentation. So I'm pleased to introduce our presenter for tonight, Robert Humphries. Humphries studied history at Miami University in Ohio before earning an MA in Celtic Studies from the University of Wales, Trinity, St. David. He is currently the director of Great Plains Welsh Heritage Center and the Archive for Welsh America, which are both located in Wymore, Nebraska. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Christina. And first of all, I'd like to thank you, Christina, for inviting me today, as well as I should have mentioned the former director, Eric Flesch, who made the initial overture to me to give this presentation. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and start the presentation. Just let me get the slideshow set up. There we go. All right. So I hope everyone's ready, and let's get things started. To start off, I think it's important to for me to explain and clarify a little bit about what I'm talking about when I say Welsh and the Welsh people. So looking at this map you see here, you see Great Britain and Ireland to the west. The red shaded area is Wales, this western peninsula of the island of Great Britain. Or as we call it in the Welsh language, Cymru. Some of you may be familiar that Wales is a term that comes from an Old English word for non-English or foreigners, and Cymru could be said to mean fellow countrymen or simply friends. So some of us actually prefer to say Cymru when we have the opportunity. The kingdoms of Wales. I'm not going to go into a lengthy explanation of Welsh history, but just to give you the historical background. Kingdoms of Wales maintained their independence until the 13th century, when the last native ruler, Llywelyn ap Gruffydd, was defeated by the English King Edward I. Although politically integrated into the English state in the 1500s, Wales has nevertheless maintained its separate national identity and its Celtic language, which is a cousin to Cornish, as well as to Irish and Scottish Gaelic. And more this language is what makes the Welsh different to most other immigrants from Britain. For through the 19th century, it was spoken by the majority of Welsh people, including thousands who had emigrated to the United States. I won't dwell on it at length, but Welsh people had been arriving in North America in small numbers since colonial times, settling in the English colonies. However, emigration really picked up at the end of the 18th century, with an influx of Welsh people into upstate New York, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. Another significant wave of immigration took place in between 1840 and 1860, which would bring Welsh settlers into Wisconsin and further west. If you look at the census report from 1890, um, you can see that Wisconsin had the fourth largest Welsh-born population during this time. That population reached its peak of about 6,500 in 1860. As this slide shows, there was a significant Welsh-born population across southern Wisconsin in the late 19th century. Today, we're going to focus on the Welsh communities in the southwestern corner of the state, particularly in Iowa County. And just to sort of recap this map, you can see that there were significant numbers of people in Racine, Waukesha around Columbia County, and Waukesha County around the village of Wales, also Columbia County, up around Oshkosh. But what we're going to be talking about today is the group of Welsh people who were living in southwest Wisconsin in the lead mining region. So what drove the Welsh to emigrate, and why did some choose to come to Wisconsin? Life in Wales was challenging for the majority of its people at this time. Most could be described as poor, whether they were tenant farmers, agricultural, or industrial workers. Most land was owned by the aristocracy or gentry, although some poorer freeholders owned their own farms. Tenant farmers struggled with oppressive rents, which had to be paid twice a year, and often necessitated the sale or slaughter of livestock. In addition, the church required tithes, unpopular with many people who dissented from the Anglican Church. Many were Methodists, Congregationalists, or Baptists, and worshipped in what were called nonconformist chapels. Of course, all of their fortunes were subject to the vicissitudes of the agricultural markets, and a collapse in agricultural prices precipitated the 1840 wave of migration. By the early 19th century, I should add that many rural people were already migrating seasonally or permanently to work in the industrial centres of South Wales, in coal mines, iron, or copper works. In fact, there were many people who migrated from rural areas of Wales into the industrial districts and then emigrated to the United States and worked in industry here with the long-term goal of buying their own land. Many of these immigrants therefore had experience in both agriculture and industry, making them well suited to exploit the opportunities available in the lead region. It is worth noting that there was some lead mining in Wales, and miners emigrated to Wisconsin to enjoy greater productivity and much higher income. 40 saw a considerable amount of excitement in the Welsh press about the possibilities of emigration to Wisconsin. In addition to personal letters and reports from Welsh settlers published in newspapers and magazines, pamphlets such as the one we see here, Disgrifiad o Diriogaeth Wisconsin, a description of the Wisconsin territory, encouraged prospective immigrants to consider the state or the territory at that time as a destination. It should be noted that this particular tract is a translation from English of one distributed by an English temperance immigration society. That society, in fact, eventually contributed to the establishment of the community of Mazomanie in Dane County. A number of Welsh people ended up in nearby Arena, just across the county line in Iowa County. The journey to America was often arduous. Until the mid-19th century, transatlantic passage meant months at sea in cramped and unhealthy conditions. Below deck on a sailing ship. Steamships eventually made the crossing quicker. Immigrants only brought a few personal items, a necessity such as tools of a trade, and relied on the assistance of Welsh people when they arrived on the eastern seaboard, whether at New York, Boston, Baltimore, or Quebec, to name a few popular entry points. And what we see here on the right side of the screen is an advertisement from a Welsh American newspaper for a Welsh immigration office that would provide assistance to immigrants and immigrants to the United States upon their arrival. The word up at the top, ymfudiaeth, which is how it's pronounced, that means emigration. Traveling with health was also another challenge that the immigrants faced. Those coming from New York could take the Erie Canal to Buffalo and then travel by steamboat to Milwaukee or Racine. Others, migrating from Welsh communities in Pennsylvania or Ohio, could travel down the Ohio River and then up the Mississippi, taking the last leg of the journey into the Wisconsin driftless by ox cart. Of course, the major pull factor for the Welsh was southwest Wisconsin's lead industry. In the 1840s, the lead mining industry in Wales was plagued with low productivity and low prices. A lead miner in Wales around 1840 might be fortunate to earn about 15 shillings a week. In Wisconsin, one English miner claimed to have earned the equivalent of 25 shillings a day. The opportunity to be self-employed by buying mineral rights from the government, as well as owning or investing in a mine, may have been more significant than higher wages in drawing lead miners from Cornwall and Yorkshire to southwestern Wisconsin. This may also have been true for the Welsh. I have to pause for just 1 second, and my apologies. Thank you. I am back. Had to take a quick pause. From what little information we have, there does not appear to have been a significant migration of miners from the lead-bearing districts of Wales as there was from Cornwall's mining districts. Among the Welsh then who came to Iowa County, lifelong miners seeking to continue in their occupation may have been the exception rather than the rule. However, one who truly was a lifelong lead miner was Robert C. Owens, a native of Holywell in Flintshire in North Wales. He had spent his early years in mining at a place called Halkin Mountain in North Wales, and then came directly to Dodgeville in 1849 to mine lead, as he had done in his native country. He was briefly lured to California by the gold rush in the early 1850s, but he returned to Wisconsin with little to show for his efforts there. Although he became well known as a Baptist minister, poet, and correspondent for various Welsh language periodicals that were published in the United States, he continued to work underground near Dodgeville until a few years before his death. And actually, if you look here, you can see the 1850 census with Robert C. Owens and listed as a miner, and his rather large family, including his son Thomas, they're also listed as a miner. And it's in a list of people. If you look on the far right side, it gives their birthplace. And we do see a few people down at the bottom there where it says Wales. You see that DO, that means or ditto, which basically almost everybody in that list on that page of the Dodgeville census was from Wales, or their children were born in Wisconsin. However, for many Welsh immigrants, the economic boom created by the lead mining industry offered the real opportunity for economic advancement. As one Welshman wrote to his father from Dodgeville in a letter later published in Wales, the mineral has risen from $13 to $19 a thousand, and this has caused a great stir throughout the country. And the miners will accept nothing but gold or silver for the mineral. The smallholder brings his produce to the market to sell to the miner and gets a good price for his animals, corn, cheese, and butter. Indeed, many miners took advantage of this wider variety of opportunities. Monmouthshire native Evan Williams, who arrived in Pennsylvania in 1841, mined coal in Kentucky, Missouri, and Illinois, and prospected for gold in California before purchasing 80 acres in Dodgeville in 1856. He continued to mine and farm this land for at least the next 25 years, eventually extracting 150 tons of zinc and lead in the 1870s. Above ground, he, quote, erected a large and pleasant residence and built around it a small village of barns. Similarly, Carnarvonshire-born Robert Williams mined lead from his arrival in Dodgeville in 1844 until 1849, when he purchased 240 acres of land from the federal government and began farming. He was noted for his, quote, roomy farmhouse and substantial barns, as well as the model stone granary he erected to commemorate his adopted country's centennial in 1876. Soon, the majority of Welsh immigrants in southwest Wisconsin had established themselves as farmers, taking the opportunity to purchase cheap land. Government land could, of course, be purchased for as little as $1.25 an acre, bearing in mind, of course, that $1.25 had a much greater value at that time than it does today. And essentially, they wanted to make a fair buck selling provisions to the mining communities. One correspondent described Dodgeville in a letter to a Welsh American newspaper in 1853 thus: "They mine the ore all around this area for 15 or 20 miles to the east of Dodgeville. There are many Welsh here, most of them miners, who own houses and gardens, and can keep cattle if they wish. All the land is a common pasture." Now, I'd like to turn to one particular family, the Davieses, from Pembrokeshire in southwest Wales. Both John Davies Sr. and his son, John, later Reverend John Davies, you see here, worked at a slate quarry near the village of Bwlch-y-Groes. Shown here is the Calvinistic Methodist chapel in that village. The younger John migrated to the United States in 1839, along with his sister Mary and her husband Jonathan. They made the Atlantic crossing first, and the parents and other siblings followed a few months later. The family lived in Pottsville, Blossburg, and Slate Hill, Pennsylvania for 3 years, where John worked in a quarry. However, the family's long-term goal was to purchase land in the West. Arriving in Wisconsin in 1846, they traveled down the Ohio River, then up the Mississippi to Galena. John and William acquired maps from the government land office in Mineral Point and took a surveyor with them to look at land southwest of the town. With other settlers from Blossburg, Pennsylvania, they comprised the core of the Welsh settlement at what became known as Pecatonica, in the Pecatonica River Valley. Land patents at the Mineral Point Historical Society indicate John Davies purchased at least 440 acres of government land in the late 1840s. Davies was ordained a minister in the Welsh Calvinistic Methodist Church and was greatly admired as a community leader. He made preaching tours around Welsh communities in the Midwest, and there are accounts of him being followed from church to church during one such tour in Minnesota. After his death, a biography was published in Welsh, and the Peniel congregation erected an expensive granite memorial to him with inscriptions in both Welsh and English, which you see on the right. Even though he never married, I think in many ways, Reverend Davies was seen as something of a patriarch to the Davies family and the Welsh settlement in general. Here we actually see one of the land grant certificates received by John Davies. This one is from 1846. And some of you may be familiar with these documents from your own family history. They specify a very they're very specific about the plot of land that is being granted. And if you look, you can also see what appears to be the president's signature. By this time, these were not actually signed by the president, so you don't actually have a presidential signature there in reality. A number of mineral land leases have also survived, bearing the signatures of John Davies and some of his Welsh neighbours, indicating that the family and other Welsh settlers were taking advantage of lead mining opportunities on their newly acquired land. The Pecatonica Welsh settlement was just one of several Welsh communities in Iowa County. Welsh settlement was also concentrated around Dodgeville and an area called the town of Ridgway, with smaller numbers of Welsh in Arena and Wyoming. There was also a cluster of Welsh farms extending into Lafayette County, south of the Pecatonica settlement. Looking at the population growth chart, we can see that Dodgeville had the largest number of Welsh settlers, followed by the town of Ridgway and then Mifflin, where the Pecatonica Welsh settlement was located. Although it is often suggested that the Welsh chose to settle in areas that reminded them of home, such as Ridgway, for example, with its hills and valleys, it is more likely that they had to settle for hillier, cheaper land, especially as they were relative latecomers when compared to the Cornish and some of the other immigrants from the eastern states and Europe that came during this period. The peak came in 1860, when the immigration wave subsided. It's important to note that while the number of those born in Wales is small, less than 1,000 in Iowa County, these immigrants were parents of often quite large families, raised in Welsh-speaking homes. In 1875, one Welsh observer, R.D. Thomas, gave an estimate of 2,560 Welsh people in Iowa County, clearly counting whole families, not just those born in Wales. The Welsh comprised then about almost 11% of the county's population in the mid-19th century. Again, just to revisit these Welsh communities, Pecatonica, which was actually spelled with an I as Picatonica during this time, was not the largest, but it maintained a distinctive Welsh identity for the longest, perhaps, and indeed continues some Welsh traditions today, which I will talk about a bit later. It comprised a cluster of Welsh farms covering about 70 square miles, located southwest of Mineral Point, in the towns of Mifflin and Linden, and also a little bit into Lafayette County. If you look at the plat map, you can see numerous Welsh family names: Hughes, Jones, Davies, Williams, and others. Also shown is a Welsh farmhouse, which you can actually see at the side of Peniel Road to this day. Dodgeville was a hub of Welsh settlement. Initially, most of the Welsh in the village of Dodgeville were lead miners. But as the town developed, many Welsh residents became business people, and there were also bankers and lawyers. Shown here is the Jones and Owens department store, which operated in the last few decades of the 19th century, founded by two men who were very successful in the business. In fact, the two families were eventually connected by marriage, and they share a handsome mausoleum in Dodgeville's East Side Cemetery. And also the Owens and Jones building that you see here still stands on Iowa Street in downtown Dodgeville. One of the businesses that inhabits it is the bakery, where I sometimes go and pick up a pasty on my lunchtime. An area of rural settlement also extended, Welsh settlement also extended several miles to the east of Dodgeville. This was known as, it was given the name Caergybi, after a town on the island of Ynys Môn or Anglesey in North Wales. The town in Wales also has an English name, Holyhead, and the name of this district east of Dodgeville later changed to Holyhead as Welsh immigrants and their children started speaking more English. Again, this 1895 plat map shows the names of many Welsh landowners, including David Jones, Elizabeth Williams, Thomas Thomas, and Owen C. Jones, to name just a few. This is one of the Welsh families that settled at Caergybi, the Davieses. They were this picture I think is from around 1890, and I would say also that this is another one that you can see at this house is another one that you can see at the side of the road. I think it's County Y, when you take that east out of Dodgeville. So look for that house next time you're in that area. That is one of the Welsh settlers' homes. There were, of course, many Welsh farmers in the town of Bridgeway and around Barneveld, down in the valleys and right up to the foot of the Blue Mound, which, by the way, also had a Welsh name, a Mynydd Glas, or the Blue Mountain. Among the Welsh in this area, Jones, a striking exception to the invisibility of women in the economic life of the Welsh community in southwestern Wisconsin. After her husband's death in 1863, Jones carried on her 490-acre farm at West Blue Mounds. The 1870 census indicates that she owned, as a head of household, $4,000 worth of real estate, substantially more than her neighbors. Her success as a farmer and also a cheese factory owner enabled her to pursue other business opportunities. In 1881, Jones moved into the village of Barneveld, where she opened a dress shop, which she later developed into a general store and grocery. And you see a fantastic photograph here of the Jones store, and just to the left is Jane Jones's home in Barneveld. I think that's actually even Jane Jones standing there. Looks like she's holding a book. So this picture is interesting also because that house is still standing in Barneveld, although I don't think the store building is there anymore. And it's actually on Jones Street. So the street was eventually named after her as well. Also near Barneveld in 1881, Walter Thomas designed and built an imposing stone barn to store winter feed for his stock raising business. And he employed three Welsh stonemasons for the construction. This is another building which stands to this day. I believe it's in Driftless. It's owned by the Driftless Conservancy, or on land that is part of that conservancy project, and just off Highway 151 in Barneveld. One of the things that kept the Welsh together was the desire to worship in their own language, and churches were the center of community life for Welsh immigrants. In Iowa County alone, there were at least 18 Welsh congregations operating during the second half of the 19th century. The main Welsh denominations were the Calvinistic Methodists, the Congregationalists, and the Baptists. Initially, these churches met as a society, or what was called in Welsh a sayat, in a settler's home. When a congregation did build a church, they often shared it for a time with another denomination that had not yet built their own. As their name suggests, the Calvinistic Methodists were Calvinistic in their theology and Methodist in their organization. And they ultimately would merge with the Presbyterian Church USA in 1920. The Calvinistic Methodists had a reputation for being quite strict. And there's one interesting story that comes to us from Dodgeville, when they were considering the construction in 1848. They had a choice of two pieces of land, one priced at $10, the other at $50. The more expensive plot happened to be used by the circus when it came to town. And they chose this plot because one particularly zealous elder cried out in the meeting, quote, "Let us buy the $50 one. It is the place the devil has chosen to display his wares. Let us buy the place to show the blood that flowed at Calvary, and he will have to go somewhere else." Just to run through some of the Welsh churches in the area. The Pecatonica Welsh settlement had Congregationalist and Baptist churches, as well as eventually two Calvinistic Methodist churches. Peniel was the first, which you see here, And Carmel was followed in 1854 by settlers on the opposite side of the Pecatonica River who didn't want to make that arduous trip every Sunday morning across the river and up the hill to Peniel. As you see in the background, actually, this is a photograph from 1915. In the background, you see a stone building that was the original um, Carmel Chapel. It was actually called Capel Kerry, or the Stone Chapel. And after they worshipped there for a time, they built the much larger church you see here in 1884. Both of these, both Peniel and Carmel churches, stand to this day, and you can visit them and you visit uh, and you can certainly sometimes take a look inside Peniel. Although unfortunately the little stone church is long gone. There were numerous Welsh in Dodgeville, of course, and these are just two of the Welsh churches. On the left, you see one of the congregational churches. I believe this was one that they had acquired from another denomination. If I'm not mistaken, if my memory isn't mistaken, it was, I think, a German church. And on the right, you see the Welsh Presbyterian or Calvinistic Methodist Church. Not long before it was eventually it was eventually demolished in 1930. And also, there's another church here which I'll share, which some of you may recognize. Um, the Welsh congregations eventually merged with the local English speaking church, and which is the Plymouth Congregationalist Church, which is right there by the courthouse in Dodgeville. And this is a photograph of the church, which was featured in a Welsh language newspaper around 1920 or so. There were other Welsh churches dotted around the area, including at Caergybi or Holyhead and in Ridgeway and Barneveld. I should also mention the Jennington Baptist Church, which was located just north of Barneveld. While most of these Welsh churches no longer stand, their cemeteries are still there for you to visit and remain a testament to the Welsh presence in southwestern Wisconsin. Before I go there, sorry. The Welsh churches really formed the center of social life for these immigrant communities. Services and Sunday school activities were conducted in Welsh, helping to reinforce a Welsh ethnic identity. In all of these churches, adults and children attended Sunday school, and there were often religious activities in the week. Many were strict Sabbatarians and prepared Sunday dinner on Saturday, so they didn't break the rule against working on the Sabbath. But the Welsh were not deadly serious all the time. The churches also hosted lively concerts and literary meetings. There was also at least one Eisteddfod. This is a Welsh language literary and musical festival, which was held in Dodgeville in 1876. Of course, not everyone who came from Wales was a member of these denominations. Among them were the Lloyd-Jones family, who were Unitarians, a religious minority within Wales. They arrived in Wisconsin in the 1840s and came to farmland south of Spring Green in the town of Wyoming in the 1860s. You can see the family in this 1882 photograph. Richard Lloyd-Jones, the family patriarch, is seated in the center, next to the empty chair of his late wife, Mary O'Malley Lloyd-Jones, as she was called. One more place over to Richard's left is his grandson, a young Frank Lloyd Wright, with his sister Maginell on his lap. As Unitarians, Lloyd-Jones built their own chapel, Unity Chapel, in 1889 at the instigation of Reverend Jenkin Lloyd-Jones, Frank Lloyd Wright's uncle. It is located just across the street from Frank Lloyd Wright's famous home and studio, Taliesin. And I would invite you to come and take a look at the chapel and the cemetery if you are in that area anytime. So in addition to being involved in religious activities, um, the Welsh were beginning to become very involved as well in the administration of their own communities. Records from the board meetings of one school district at Pecatonica reveal that the Welsh were eager to attend and vote at the annual meeting. Furthermore, they did so at times in their native language. The annual meeting minutes were sometimes recorded in Welsh by secretaries who probably assumed their notes would only be read by fellow Welsh speakers, although the practice ceased in the 1860s as settlers of different ethnic backgrounds arrived in the district. Many of the board members were also church elders, showing again the significance of religious institutions to Welsh community life. It's significant that the Pecatonica Welsh settlers were conducting some of the business of local government, in this case of the school board, and operating with the frame of American democracy through their native language. This would continue with the arrival of the Civil War, when more than ever they saw themselves as becoming loyal Americans. Because their religion strongly influenced them, favored causes such as temperance and prohibition, they also strongly supported abolitionism. Most of the Welsh saw the Civil War as a conflict to end slavery rather than just to save the Union, and their contributions to the Welsh language press reflect this effort. Robert C. Owens, who I've mentioned before, the miner and poet of Dodgeville, published numerous poems supporting the anti-slavery and union causes in Welsh language magazines and newspapers, which were published in America. In 1865, he published a long ode in memory of his son-in-law, David Roach, who had died in February at the Battle of Hatcher's Run in Virginia. I'll just read you one stanza to give you a sense of his sentiment. I'll read it in Welsh and then follow it with an English translation. Nid oedd ynddo duedd bradwr, gwir wladgarwr ydoedd ef. Fe ddadleuai dros iawnderau, dia gwyn o dan y nef. Gelyn perffaith I gaeth ddewed. Free press, free speech a byth free men. Oedd I enwog ar wyddeiria, cael saethau llawer sen. He was a true patriot. He argued for the rights of black and white under heaven, a perfect enemy to slavery. Free press, free speech, and forever free men were his famous mottos, despite the arrows of rebuke. Some of you may in fact recognize a paraphrasing of the slogan of the first Republican presidential candidate, John C. Fremont, in the line, free press, free speech, and forever free men. If I remember correctly, it was the original slogan was something like free speech, free men, free soil, free men, Fremont. Some of the Welsh at Pecatonica also put their anti-slavery beliefs to work by welcoming a formerly enslaved man into their community. The exact circumstances of James E. Williams's emancipation are unclear, and it would appear that so out of slavery by a man named Edward Williams, who was a Pecatonica settler who had served in the Union Army. Whatever the facts, he lived at the Welsh settlement for the rest of his life. He never married and lived with several families throughout the years, farming and mining led. He could also be relied upon to help neighbors and was described as popular and well-liked among the Welsh. In addition to the portrait of James Williams we see here, there's also a photograph of him pulling stumps with his Welsh neighbors, as well as his grave marker in the Carmel Welsh Cemetery, which states that he was born a slave in Virginia and made free by President Lincoln's proclamation. The Mining and Rollo Jameson Museums also has a windlass in its collection, which Williams may have used in his own lead mining operation. By the second half of the 19th century, then, the Welsh in the United States were developing a reconceived ethnic identity. They were no longer Welsh immigrants, they were American citizens born in Wales, who used Welsh in private and religious life while supporting their integration into an English-speaking culture. In southwestern Wisconsin, some of the Welsh had risen to become important civic and business leaders. One example was Samuel W. Rees of Dodgeville. Born in Llanbryn Mawr in Wales, in North Wales in 1829, Rees arrived in the United States in 1845, settling first in Cincinnati before coming to Dodgeville in 1852. He initially worked as a clerk in a general store before taking up the study of law in 1856. Admitted to the bar 2 years later, Rees embarked on a varied career serving as president of the village board, district attorney, and later mayor after Dodgeville was incorporated as a city. Perhaps his most lasting contribution to the prosperity of Dodgeville was the establishment of the village's first bank in 1871. Indeed, Rees had joined the local economic elite as one of the, quote, solid men of Iowa County, a player in Wisconsin's Republican politics. Tragically, Rees died when attending a political meeting in Madison in 1902. While staying overnight at a hotel, reaching for the electric light switch, he accidentally turned on the gas and was asphyxiated. Another Welshman of note was William Arthur Jones. A nephew of the Reverend John Davies, he arrived in Wisconsin at the age of 6 and was raised in a Welsh-speaking household in Pecatonica. James was educated at the Platteville State Normal School and worked as a school teacher before becoming superintendent of Iowa County Schools. However, Jones aggressively pursued successful careers in business and politics and went into banking in Mineral Point before turning his talents to the Mineral Point Railroad Company and the Mineral Point Zinc Company. Jones was elected mayor of the town in 1894. Mayor of the town, and in 1894 he was elected to the state assembly, serving 2 terms. Then he was appointed Commissioner of Indian Affairs by President William McKinley in 1897, a post in which he would serve until 1907. He returned to Wisconsin, building a grand mansion in Mineral Point, which you see here, where he died in 1912. Interestingly, his 2 younger brothers, Thomas D. Jones and David B. Jones, took a different political direction. Both attended Princeton University and befriended the university president and later U.S. President Woodrow Wilson. Both brothers became very wealthy from the zinc business, which they had begun with their brother William. They were benefactors of Princeton University, donating to the construction of a building later named in their honor. And they were also supporters of the Democratic Party in Wilson's administration. David Jones was in fact wealthy enough to charter a personal train to race at record-breaking speed from Southern California to his home in Chicago in 1923. By the end of the 19th century then, Welsh immigrants had established a thriving ethnic community in southwestern Wisconsin. Largely prosperous, they had maintained their ethnic culture and their language while becoming thoroughly American. However, the new century would quickly bring a decline in Welsh identity as the grandchildren of the early immigrants adopted the English language and intermarried with other ethnic groups. The rural Welsh settlements experienced demographic decline as older generations passed away or moved into larger towns. Farmers at Caergybi sold their land and went to live in Dodgeville, and some of the Pecatonica Welsh retired to the new village of Rui. The younger generation preferred English church services, which began to be introduced in the 1890s. The Welsh churches dwindled in attendance and were absorbed by the English-speaking congregations. The Welsh Calvinistic Methodist Church in Dodgeville was sold in 1930 and demolished shortly thereafter. However, the story does not end, for echoes of culture can still be heard in the Drefflers Hills. Welsh names still grace many rural roads, and Welsh cemeteries dot the landscape. Samuel W. Rees's grand home and the Owens and Jones building still stand in Dodgeville, as well as Jane Jones's home in Barneville, and of course, Frank Lloyd Wright's Taliesin, on a brow of a hill overlooking Wisconsin River. The Pecatonica Welsh settlement celebrates its heritage with an annual Cymanfagani, or hymn sing, held every June. There, you can listen to some favorite hymns in Gymraeg in the Welsh language. Enjoy tea and traditional Welsh cakes, and take a stroll at the very place John Davies came to farm and preach almost 180 years ago. Diolch yn fawr, as we say very much.
All righty. Thank you so much. I really appreciated that presentation. That was fantastic. And like I said, if you have any questions, please submit them down below. I am going to, and both of us, hopefully, there we go. Alrighty, so I'll jump in with one of the questions that I have, and that is regards to language in the Welsh language here. And your research and from what you've seen here, are there still pockets of Welsh speakers in this area of Wisconsin?
Well, if you count me, perhaps. Um, from what I've seen, the Welsh language was spoken by people up until the mid 20th century in some areas. I think I've heard that around in the Welsh settlement, the Pecatonica Welsh settlement, there were some older people who still spoke Welsh up until I think the 1950s. But generally, though, people had switched to speaking English. And I know that there are a few people around with connections to Wales who probably know some of the Welsh language. But as a community language, as something that's spoken in the churches, for example, I spoke of the Peniel Welsh Church. When we have those Gymanfoedd Gani, as they're called, the hymn sings, those are there is some singing in Welsh, but it's not this. People are not conversing in Welsh. It's not really the language a language that people are familiar with, except perhaps as some of the hymn lyrics.
Wow. All right, we got some questions that popped in here. Starting with the first one, could you please repeat what you were saying about the leadership of the Mineral Point Zinc Company? Did you say that the top 3 corporate officers were Welsh with the name Jones?
That is correct. It was William Arthur Jones, David Benton Jones, and Thomas Davies Jones were the 3 top officers. And William, who was the older brother, was the secretary and treasurer. I think David was the president, and I think Thomas was the vice president. It's right there on that letterhead, which I shared in the presentation. But yes, this was a Welsh-owned business, and really a family business. And I forget the date, but they eventually sold it to a company. I think it was called the U.S. Zinc Company, which was based in New Jersey. And that's really where the two younger Jones brothers, made their fortunes, was selling that company to the U.S. Zinc Company, and they made a huge amount of money off of that. And I believe one of the brothers too was on the board of directors of the International Harvester Company, and served. I think it was Thomas who served also in the Woodrow Wilson administration during World War One. He was involved in the agriculture department, I think. So people, movers and shakers, and yes, this was a Welsh concern.
Okay. Next question. In my family tree, about 3 or 4 generations back, it appears that Davies became Davis. Have you run into something like this? Was it merely a spelling mistake?
Well, that's a good question. You see, I think sometimes partly it's spelling, um, but names changed a lot because of the way that they were written down. One thing to remember, though, is that the name Davies in Welsh, that name is Davis. Um, so so when you see Davis, that is also sort of an anglicization. Both Davies and Davis are both anglicizations of Davis, which of course comes from David. So yes, I would say it's essentially the same name, but it probably comes from people hearing things differently and then writing things down. Perhaps they just decided to simplify the name by taking out that E.
All right, I'm going to combine the next two questions because they're both related to the Lloyd-Jones family. The first one is, were any of the Lloyd-Jones family members connected to the mining industry, and why did they come to Southwest Wisconsin?
The Lloyd Joneses were not really miners; they were farmers, and they had initially they came in 1844. Um, there was a man named Richard Lloyd Jones was the sort of the patriarch of the family. It was actually his brother, whose name was Jenkin, had come first to Wisconsin. Uh, the the um, the the Lloyd Joneses left Wales for a number of reasons, partly economic, but also because they were Unitarians. And there was a lot of political unrest. The Unitarians were sort of on the wrong side of that. Um, and Richard saw, Jenkins' invitation to emigrate as something he should take up. So they actually lived in Ixonia, which is, out closer to Milwaukee, for several years, being somewhat an obstinate dissident. Richard Lloyd Jones upset some of the other Welsh people there with his religious beliefs, and they moved west to Bear Valley, north of Lone Rock, for several years. And then around the time of the Civil War, they bought land in Wyoming Valley and began to farm there. So they were always farmers. One thing that's interesting is that Jenkin Lloyd Jones, who I mentioned, he was a Unitarian minister, and Frank Lloyd Wright's uncle acquired um, the um, the old shot tower, uh, which became the old shot tower uh, at Helena and the land around it. And he eventually used that as sort of a Unitarian summer camp in the late 1800s, and eventually willed it to the state of Wisconsin, and it's now Tower Hill State Park. So that's the only sort of connection to lead mining that I can think of, and it's not a direct one.
Okay. Can you give a little information about the immigration from the U.S. Midwest of Welsh families to Argentina?
Yes, that's a really interesting subject. So there was an idea in the mid 19th century that some of the Welsh people in the United States were becoming too American. They were turning to the English language. They were losing their Welsh identity, and there was a proposal to establish a Welsh colony somewhere else, maybe further out, further west, or maybe in another part of the world. And it was actually a Welshman who lived for some years in the United States who kind of led the project to establish a Welsh colony in Argentina. They went to Argentina because the Argentinian government wanted European settlers to go there, and the uh, the 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 people running this project went to they published uh, propaganda essentially saying that you should come to Argentina because it's a great place to come and settle, and it's just like Wales. And one of the actually another person who was involved in this was a man uh, who was from Wales who had grown up in around I want to say around Portage, Wisconsin, somewhere around there, and he ended up spending the rest of his life in Argentina. Um, but they sort of sold this great sort of land of milk and honey to the Welsh people. And there was a ship that sailed from Liverpool carrying Welsh immigrants. Many of them were actually industrial workers and not farmers, interestingly enough. They had no idea how to farm, but they sailed on a it was a very lengthy voyage, of course, across the equator down uh, to Argentina, and they were just sort of dropped off on the shore of what was essentially a desert, with spiky plants that tore your clothes and no shelter and no very little water. They somehow managed to survive, and with the help of the local indigenous people, they eventually established invented a system of sort of irrigation to make the land a little bit more fruitful. And over the coming decades, there was a somewhat thriving Welsh community in this remote area of Argentina. They even sort of established a sister colony out at the foot of the Andes, about 400 miles away. And I've looked to see if there was any, I would say if there were connections to Wisconsin. And one thing I did find was that in the mid 1870s, somebody came to Wisconsin trying to encourage Welsh people here to go to Patagonia, and they went to they had a public meeting in Dodgeville, and apparently the people who went to the meeting were not very impressed. They thought that staying in Wisconsin was a much better idea. But I believe there are about 3,000 people in Patagonia today in this area who either speak Welsh or know some Welsh or have um, some very strong Welsh ancestry. There are also Welsh schools, a couple of schools that teach children in Welsh in Argentina. So it's something that, and there's also been a lot of cultural exchange between Wales and Argentina to kind of keep that connection alive. So probably more than you need and anyone wanted to know, but there it is.
All right, here's a fantastic one. Any resources that you would suggest to learn more about the Welsh in the Pecatonica area?
You know, well, I can suggest a couple of things. One of them is there is a little book by the published by the Wisconsin Historical Society, Welsh in Wisconsin, that actually has quite a bit of information. It was published back in the 1970s or 1980s, and then recently a new edition has come out with some updated material in it. But that actually is a good starting place. Just if you can get your hands on the history of Iowa County from 1881, there were these county histories that were published all around that time, and those have a lot of biographies of people, sort of little short biographies, a lot of detail about when churches were established, when people came, and you can look up the town of Mifflin and see all of the details about the Welsh people living in there. It's not going to say Pecatonica Welsh settlement, but it will say it may talk about the Welsh settlement in Mifflin, and so that would be a good place to go. For what it's worth, I wrote a dissertation, which has a lot of information in it, a lot more detail than I gave today, and that is actually available on the you can download that from the University of Wales Trinity St. David website. So I don't know if that's something that maybe I can send to you if somebody's interested. Certainly, people can certainly contact me as well. But those would be the places, if you're looking to actually look at archives and records and photographs even, I would go to the Iowa County Historical Society in Dodgeville. Also, the Mineral Point Historical Society has some holdings related to the Davies family in the Pecatonica Welsh settlement.
Okay, great resources jump on. What are some of the Welsh cultural traditions that may have survived in some regard in southwestern Wisconsin? Is the Welsh choral tradition represented?
I would say that is represented by the Welsh hymn sing that takes place every year in Rui at the Peniel Chapel. That's definitely one way. I think I meet people sometimes who have some Welsh ancestry, and they may remember. I've over the years I've met some older people who remembered Welsh grandparents. They actually do remember a little bit of Welsh being spoken. The most common phrase being "Caid a mynd i'r gwely," which means shut your mouth and go to bed. But seems to be a common thread these people. But I would say yes. I mean, that sort of musical tradition is kept alive by the Gymanfa Ganu, the hymn sing, which I forget. I'm sorry, I don't remember which date. I want to say it's June the 9th this year, but you would have to check. There is a Welsh Cymanfa Association of Wisconsin website that people can go to and get information about that. And that brings together people not only from, it brings people from all over Wisconsin and beyond, with an interest in either, singing in Welsh or just connecting with Welsh culture.
Awesome. Can you say something on the relationship between immigrants from Wales and Cornwall? Were their communities fairly insular, or did they interact in any way?
Well, well, I've read something that was quite alarming actually. I was reading some years ago when I was researching my dissertation, and I'm sorry I don't remember the name, but it was a typescript of somebody's a Cornish immigrant's account of coming to Dodgeville when he was a boy and growing up in Dodgeville in the Cornish community there, and it talks about how the Cornish lived in sort of Dirty Hollow where the mine, the lead diggings were, and the Welsh and the Americans, the so-called Yankees, lived up on the hill. And the this Cornishman talks about how the Cornish boys would throw rocks at the Americans and the Welsh and call them yellow-bellied Yankees. So I don't know that there was some bad feeling there. I don't know. I think it was just young men uh, you know being a little poorly behaved. But actually, there's interesting enough. There's a one article I came across where it refers to in Welsh. It was in a Welsh newspaper, and it talks about how the Dodgeville is now governed more by our cousins, the Cornish. So there was a recognition that there was a sort of a cultural affinity there. Um, I know that Samuel W. Rees's wife was of either Cornish birth or Cornish ancestry. So there was also a lot of intermarriage between the Welsh and the Cornish. The interesting thing is that the Cornish, although there is a Cornish Celtic language, um, I know that by the time that Cornish people were coming to Wisconsin, it was, yeah, I wouldn't say extinct, but it certainly wasn't something that anybody really among the Cornish was speaking. Um, and has since been there's been a lot of revival of Cornish since then. So they would have been speaking English with some Cornish words thrown in, and that Cornish dialect of English. Um, but there were also, in some ways, I know that the Cornish were also they were Methodists. They had a similar culture in many ways to the Welsh. So I think that the Cornish and the Welsh would have got along very well for the most part.
Fantastic. Okay, we got a couple more questions here. In recent U.S. censuses, do you know how many Iowa County residents have mentioned that they have Welsh ancestry?
That's a really good question, and I'm sorry I don't know that answer. I would say that it's probably quite a few, but that's not a very precise answer. I've certainly met, in doing my own research on Welsh in Iowa County for my dissertation, I met and also spending a lot of time at the Iowa County Historical Society. It seemed like a lot of people had some, a Welsh grandparent, great grandparent. There were the connections are there, the ancestry is there. But I think people also, because people intermarry, they may also think that they're more German or Norwegian or English or Cornish.
Okay, what are some Welsh foods that we may have today? I could tell that it's around supper time because of that question.
Well, I mentioned Welsh cakes, which are these little sort of scone-like things that Welsh people and Welsh Americans will make. As sort of um, the standard refreshment. Um, and there are some. Uh, if you actually go to Wales, there's a lot of sort of fancy cuisine that's being promoted. A lot of fish dishes and something that's a little bit unusual from South Wales is a sort of I want to say a pickled seaweed called lava bread that people like. Some people like. but you know, I mean, in many respects, it's very similar to other food from the British Isles, and you know, the Welsh had their own sort of pasties and pies um, and you know, those kind of dishes.
Oh, sounds fantastic. Yeah, definitely a little bit hungry now. And I think we're gonna wrap it up with this question. And how can you learn Welsh?
Well, there are numerous ways to learn Welsh. You know, I'm actually on the board of an organization called Cymdeithas Madog, and this year, actually, we are bringing a Welsh language course to Madison. It's a week-long course in July, and you can spend a week at Edgewood College learning Welsh with instructors, some of whom are coming over from Wales. And so that's a great opportunity. You know, there are always the online things like Duolingo and various apps that you can help that can help. One way that and there are also Welsh online discussion groups through again through Cymdeithas Madog. I should put that in the comments. Well, no, I can't do. Okay, well, we'll have to share that some way. But yes, if you look up Welsh course Madison 2024, you should find some information out there soon. But yes, I would say, you know, there are organizations in the United States that are teaching some Welsh. There's a college in Ohio called it looks like Rio Grande, but it's pronounced Rio Grande. Um, and they have a Welsh Studies department. It's because there were a lot of Welsh people that settled there. It's in southeastern Ohio, and they also have been doing some online Welsh outreach. Um, so yeah, you can also contact me. My email address with it, you know, for any questions about Welsh history is my best email address for me would be director@greatplainswelsh.org. And you know, I would be happy to answer any questions and hopefully point you in the right direction
Okay,
if I don't know the
fantastic.
answer.
Yeah, we'll make sure to include any additional notes or links in our YouTube videos, which you guys will be receiving. But otherwise, if you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to Robert. And thank you so much for presenting tonight. We really appreciate it. I think this was a great way to end our Zoom presentation series for the Winter Lyceum.
Okay, well, it's been a great pleasure. So thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I hope you have a good rest of your evening. And join us in person at the Mining Museum on April 7th to talk about taxidermy. So have a good rest of your day. Bye bye.
Bye bye.